The moment my uncle clinked his glass and stood up at Thanksgiving dinner, I knew something was about to go wrong. He had that look, the one where his chin lifts just a little too high and his eyes scan the room to make sure everyone is watching. My uncle has always needed an audience, and that evening where 70 members of my family crowded around two pushed-together tables in my grandparents' dining room, he had exactly the one he wanted. "I just want to say," he started, his voice carrying that practiced warmth that never quite reaches his eyes, "how proud this family is of everything Owen has accomplished this year." Owen, my cousin, who had just made partner at his law firm at 31. Everyone applauded. My grandmother pressed her hand to her chest like she might cry. My aunt, Owen's mother, my uncle's wife, dabbed at her eyes with a cloth napkin. I clapped too. I genuinely did. Owen worked hard and I was happy for him. But then my uncle kept going. "This family," he said, his gaze sweeping the table and landing, just for a beat, on me, "rewards ambition. It rewards people who make something of themselves, who don't waste their potential chasing dreams that don't pay the bills." The table went quiet in that specific way that means everyone heard it, and no one wants to acknowledge they heard it. I was 28 years old, sitting across from my cousin, the new law partner, and I was a middle school music teacher. I stared at my plate. My green beans had gone cold. Somewhere to my left I heard my mother set down her fork. I should tell you who I was before I tell you what happened. I grew up in a family where success had a very specific shape. My grandfather had built a small regional accounting firm from nothing. My uncle had taken it somewhere bigger. My father, his younger brother, had gone into finance. My aunt on my mother's side was a hospital administrator. My cousin Owen was already a lawyer. My other cousin Beth was finishing her MBA. The family tree read like a LinkedIn profile for an overachiever support group. And then there was me. I had loved music since I was 4 years old when my grandmother sat me down at her upright piano and showed me Heart and Soul. By the time I was 12, I was playing in 2 bands at school. By 16, I had written my first original song. By college I had decided, firmly, after a lot of praying and a lot of journal entries and one very long conversation with my father that ended in a strained silence, that I was going to pursue music education. I wanted to teach. I wanted to put instruments in kids' hands. I wanted to be the teacher I never had. My father had nodded slowly. "That's a choice," he said. "Not a good choice, just a choice." My uncle had been less diplomatic. "You're going to spend your life babysitting other people's kids for 40,000 a year?" he'd said at Christmas, my senior year of college. "That's what you're doing with a music scholarship?" I had smiled tightly and said I was excited about it. That had been 7 years ago. And in those 7 years, every family gathering had contained some version of that same moment. A comment here. A loaded question there. "So are you still teaching?" said the way someone might ask. "So are you still going through that phase?" I had learned to go quiet, to redirect, to laugh it off, to remind myself that it didn't matter what they thought, that I loved my work, that my students' faces when they finally got a chord progression right were worth more than any bonus check. I had learned those things, and I still showed up to Thanksgiving every year because I loved my grandmother, because my mother asked me to, because some part of me, the stubborn part, refused to let them push me out of my own family. But that year, the year Owen made partner and my uncle gave his little speech, something shifted. I want to be honest about why I kept going back, because I've thought about it a lot since then, and I don't think it was weakness. I think it was hope, which is maybe more painful in the end. I kept hoping my uncle would see me differently. I kept hoping my father would say even once, "I'm proud of you for the life you built." I kept hoping that the family I loved would eventually make room for the version of me that actually existed, instead of the version I'd imagined for me, and were perpetually disappointed I hadn't become. That kind of hope is its own trap. It keeps you at the table long after you should have pushed back your chair and walked away. The Thanksgiving of Owen's partnership was the first time I understood that. After my uncle's toast, dinner resumed. Someone asked Owen about his caseload. Someone else started talking about the stock market. My grandmother asked if anyone wanted more stuffing. The moment dissolved the way those moments always did, absorbed into the noise of a family dinner that moved on from its own wounds without ever treating them. Later, in the kitchen, my mother found me doing dishes. "Ignore him," she said quietly, picking up a towel to dry. "I always do," I said. She looked at me for a moment. "He doesn't mean—" "Mum!" I kept my eyes on the sink. "He does mean it. That's the part we keep pretending isn't true." She didn't answer. I heard her set the towel down and walk back to the dining room. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, I got an email that changed things. I had been running an after-school music program at Jefferson Middle School for 4 years. We were small, a choir of 22 kids, a beginning band of 14, a handful of kids who came in on Fridays just to mess around on the keyboards. But we were scrappy. The year before, our choir had placed second in the county competition. I had written a grant that got us 12 new instruments. I stayed 2 hours late 3 days a week because there was always a kid who needed more time, more patience, more someone. The email was from the Hartwell Foundation, a non-profit that funded arts education programs across the state. They'd seen our county competition performance on YouTube. One of the other parents had filmed it, and they wanted to meet. 3 months later, they awarded my program a $47,000 grant. The money meant we could expand, more instruments, a proper sound system, a summer intensive. I submitted the paperwork, cleared it with the principal, and started planning. I didn't tell my family. Not yet. I don't entirely know why. Some of it was superstition. It felt fragile, like naming it out loud would jinx it. But some of it, if I'm honest, was something pricier than superstition. I wanted to wait until it was real, until it was undeniable, until the check had cleared and the program had launched and there was nothing left to qualify or undercut or reduce to a footnote. I wanted to walk into a room with receipts. Easter came 4 months later. My grandmother's house. Ham and scalloped potatoes and the particular chaos of my aunt's 3 kids under 7 running laps around the living room furniture. Owen was there with his girlfriend, who was also a lawyer. They made a very attractive couple, and they knew it. My uncle had his arm around my aunt's shoulders and the satisfied look of a man whose life has gone exactly according to his own script. I had driven up alone. I was seeing someone, a guy named, well, I'll call him a friend because that's what he became eventually, but at the time we were figuring it out, and he'd offered to come. I told him not to. I didn't want to subject anyone I cared about to this if I could help it. Dinner was fine at first. That's how it always starts. Fine. My grandmother's cooking. My little cousins being adorable. The comfortable parts of family that remind you why you keep showing up. And then my uncle started talking about investments. He was in the middle of explaining some move he'd made with a portfolio. I had stopped fully processing his financial monologues years ago. I just nodded at the right intervals. When he turned to me, "What about you?" he said. "You putting anything away? Or does the school district even offer a 403B? A 403B is the retirement plan equivalent for public school employees. He knew this. He was a financial professional. He was asking not because he didn't know the answer, but because he wanted to establish in front of everyone that I was the kind of person whose retirement prospects were worth pitying. "I contribute," I said evenly. 15%. "Smart," he said, in a tone that made it sound like he was surprised. "Then must be tough, though, on a teacher's salary." He said teacher's salary the way some people say starter home. Like it's a temporary condition. Like it's something you endure until you get serious. I felt my jaw tighten. Under the table I pressed my palm flat against my thigh. "I do okay," I said. "You were so talented," my aunt said with genuine, devastating sweetness. "I always thought you could have done something real with music, like professionally." "Teaching music is doing something professionally with music," I said. She blinked, like it hadn't occurred to her. My uncle made a small sound, not quite a laugh, close enough. And then, I don't know if it was the sound or the blink or the accumulated weight of every Easter and Thanksgiving and Christmas where some version of this same exchange had happened. I made a decision. I reached into my bag, took out my phone, pulled up the email from the Hartwell Foundation. "Actually," I said, "I've been meaning to share some news." The table quieted. My program received a grant this spring. $47,000 from the Hartwell Foundation. We're expanding our instrument library, launching a summer intensive for kids who can't afford private lessons, and partnering with 2 other schools in the district to pilot a new music curriculum. Silence. My grandmother was the first to speak. "Oh, sweetheart," she said. Her voice was soft and entirely sincere. "That's wonderful." "That's," my father started. He stopped, looked at me in a way I wasn't used to, like he was recalibrating something. "That's a significant grant." "It is," I said. "We worked hard for it." I looked at my uncle. He picked up his water glass. "Well," he said, "good for the kids. Not good for you. Not I was wrong about you. Not even the basic human acknowledgement that something real had happened. Just good for the kids." Like I was still incidental to my own story. I nodded, put my phone away, picked up my fork. But something had changed. Not in the room. The room rearranged itself around the moment the way rooms always do. Someone changed the subject. My little cousin knocked over his juice. Life resumed. What changed was inside me. Some weight I hadn't known I was still carrying quietly set itself down. I didn't need him to say it. I had already said it. And every person at that table had heard it. That summer we launched the program. 28 kids signed up for the first intensive session. We ran it out of the school's band room, Monday through Thursday, 3 weeks in July. I had 2 volunteers, a former student who was home from college, and a local musician I connected with through the grant network. And we had enough instruments that no kid had to share. I want to tell you about a kid named, I'll call him the kid who changed everything, because that's what he became. He was 11. He came in the first day in a shirt 2 sizes too big that I suspect belonged to an older sibling. He'd never touched a guitar before. He sat in the back and watched the other kids with an expression I recognized, the carefully neutral face of someone who wants something badly but has been disappointed before and is protecting himself from it. By week 2, he was the first one to arrive every morning. By week 3, he had learned to play the opening riff of a song he'd written himself. 3 chords, a simple melody, lyrics about his neighborhood that were more honest and more beautiful than most things I've heard from adults. On the last day of the intensive, we did a small showcase for parents. He played his song. His mother, who worked nights, who had taken off specifically to come, sat in the 3rd row and cried in that quiet way where you're not sure she even knew she was doing it. I stood in the back of the room and thought, this is what I do, this is the thing I built. No one in my family was there to see it, but I have never in my life needed them to be. Thanksgiving came again, my grandmother's house. Ham replaced by turkey, scalloped potatoes, replaced by sweet potatoes, the same furniture, the same chaos, the same people. I had thought a lot about whether to go. I'd talked to a friend about it, someone outside the family who could be honest with me, and she'd said something I've carried since. You don't owe them access to you. But you also don't owe them the power to keep you away from your grandmother's table. I went. My uncle was there. Owen was there, now engaged to the lawyer girlfriend, the ring enormous and presumably tasteful. Everyone made a fuss over it. My grandmother beamed. Dinner was, for the first part, genuinely fine. My uncle was in a good mood. Some deal had closed, some number had gone up. And when he's in a good mood, he's almost tolerable. He told a story about a golf trip. My father laughed at the right moments. My aunt refilled everyone's water. I watched it all with a kind of clarity I hadn't had at this table before. Not detachment exactly, more like perspective. Like I had climbed high enough to see the whole map. About halfway through the meal, my uncle turned to me. "So," he said, "how's the music thing going?" "The music thing. 7 years of this." "Really well," I said. "The program's growing. We're expanding to 2 more schools next semester." "That grant money's still holding out?" "We're applying for a renewal. And we've had some private donors come in too, actually. Couple of families in the district who wanted to contribute after the showcase." My uncle nodded slowly. He had the look of a man doing mental math on something he can't quite find the flaw in. "Huh," he said. That was it. Just, huh. But I noticed, and I want to tell you this because it mattered to me more than I expected. My father was watching me while this happened. and when my uncle looked away, my father looked at me for a long moment across the table, and then he gave me a small nod. Not applause, not an apology, not the sweeping acknowledgement I'd spent years hoping for, just a nod. It was enough, maybe more than enough. It was honest, and it was real, and it was mine. I still go to Thanksgiving. I still sit at that table. I've stopped waiting for my uncle to have some kind of transformation, because I'd made peace with the fact that he's not going to. Some people's approval is simply not on the table, and spending your life trying to earn it is just a way of handing them your time. What I have instead is this: a program that now serves over 100 kids across 3 middle schools, a summer intensive that's in its 3rd year, a partnership with the city's parks department that brings instrument lending libraries to 2 community centres, a former student who came back to volunteer and who told me last spring that our program was the reason she applied to Berkeley. And every day I walk into a classroom full of kids who are learning that their voices matter, that the thing they love is worth the work, that someone believes in them enough to show up. I built that, not despite my family's skepticism, just alongside it and beyond it and without waiting for their permission. My uncle still refers to my job as the music thing. My grandmother still asks if I'm doing okay financially in that gentle way that means she worries. My father and I have a relationship now that is careful and growing, one honest conversation at a time. And me? I drive to school every morning and I set up the room before the kids arrive, and sometimes, on the really good days, a kid will figure out something they didn't know they could do, and the look on their face is so pure that I have to turn away for a second just to hold it together. Those mornings I think about that first Thanksgiving, my uncle's toast, the green beans gone cold, the quiet that meant everyone heard it and no one wanted to say so. I think about the girl who sat there and stared at her plate. I want to tell her, you don't need to convince anyone. You just need to keep building. The work speaks, whether they listen or not. I keep coming back to that kid in the too big shirt, the one who sat in the back row that first morning of the summer, intensive, arms crossed, face carefully blank. The one who showed up early every single day after that. The one who wrote 3 chords and a melody about his neighborhood and played it in front of his mother while she cried in the 3rd row without knowing she was crying. I didn't plan for him to be the answer to anything. I was just doing my job. But looking back, I think that's exactly the point. The things that matter most rarely announce themselves. They accumulate quietly, and then one day you look up and realize you've built something real. For a long time, I let my uncle's voice take up too much space in my head, not because he was right, but because I was waiting for him to admit he was wrong. That's a particular kind of trap, and I think a lot of people know it. You keep returning to the table, literally in my case, hoping that this time someone will finally see you clearly, hoping that the work you've put in will somehow translate into the acknowledgement you've been quietly starving for. What I've learned, slowly, the hard way, is that integrity doesn't wait for witnesses. You don't get to do good work only when someone respectable is watching. The 11-year-old in the back row doesn't care whether my uncle respects my career. The mother crying in the 3rd row isn't thinking about my family's opinion of my salary. The work either matters or it doesn't, and the people it matters to are the ones actually in the room. That's the moral side of it. The question of whether you can keep doing right by others, even when doing right gets you nothing in return from the people you most want to impress. I had to decide, more than once, that the answer was yes, that I would show up for my students whether or not my family ever showed up for me. That choice didn't feel heroic, it felt quiet and a little lonely. But it was mine. The intelligence part, and I mean intelligence in the broadest sense, the willingness to think clearly about your own life, came when I finally stopped misreading the situation. My uncle was never going to be converted by my success. That wasn't stubbornness on his part, it was just who he was. The smart move wasn't to argue or to perform or to hope harder. It was to redirect my energy toward the people and the work that could actually receive it. And then there's the third thing, the one that doesn't get enough credit: endurance. Not the dramatic kind, not gritting your teeth through some cinematic trial, just the daily, unglamorous persistence of showing up when the room is empty, writing the grant application when you're exhausted, staying 2 hours late because a kid needs one more try. That's what actually builds a life. Not a single defiant moment at a dinner table, though that had its place, but the 10,000 small decisions to keep going that nobody ever sees. My dad's nod across the Thanksgiving table meant something to me. I won't pretend it didn't. But what meant more was that by the time he gave it, I had already stopped needing it. That's the thing I'd want anyone in a similar situation to hear. You can love your family and still refuse to let their limitations define the ceiling of your life. You can sit at the same table and live in a completely different world. The distance between those two things isn't betrayal, it's growth. The kid who wrote his own song is in 8th grade now. He started teaching the riff to the younger kids who come in on Fridays. I can't think of a better ending than that.